The story begins with the kids wanting to see if one guy can really turn into a tiger, to which he asked them if they didn't know who he was and what he was capable of. After all, everyone knows that this guy is the last divine beast on Earth, and his name is Lionel Millard. These kids have heard about him many times and asked for a one-time demonstration of how he turns into a tiger, but he replied to them that it was his secret ability, so unfortunately no one was allowed to see it. Instead, he offered to show them how he could sleep at night. But it was boring and uninteresting for the kids, when one girl, Hannah, was watching them, realized that this guy was popular with the kids. Her friend Amelia came up to her and asked if she had seen this handsome man. His arrival was a real event. Amelia even said that Amareya, who she's in love with, looks like a shriveled pumpkin against him. But Hannah admonished her and said that was very rude of her. But Amelia didn't care about that, because neither Amelia nor Lionel would ever love her. So she had made her peace with it long ago. But it turns out that Hannah has learned something, and she has good news for her friend. Rumor has it that Amelia bought a bouquet of roses today to ask Amelia out on a date. But how will she be able to help her auntie now, when she has such a beautiful evening coming up that she has dreamed of all her life? And in order not to spoil such a beautiful evening for her friend, Hannah offered her help and will be able to do all her chores instead of her friend. To which Amelia said she had the best friend ever. And after that, I immediately started thinking about what to wear on a date tonight. Because the girls were talking too loudly, they were reprimanded and asked to keep their voices down. And after that, the woman asked to take the soup to one of the guests. But he turned out to be a real hottie. Even that woman noticed it. When the girl approached him, she was clearly interested in him, and he asked if she worked here. Hannah couldn't even think that a guy like that could pay attention to her. As suddenly he asked if he could ask her one question. Perhaps she misunderstood, but it seemed to her that he was even willing to pay for it. And since she had no other visitors and little time, Hannah agreed. It turned out that he was looking for someone to travel with him for months, but she didn't immediately realize he meant her, so she said it would be very difficult to find the right person. Since the guy had several wishes and requirements for him, Hannah had a hard time imagining what kind of person she could recommend to him, and she didn't understand how he could be looking for someone to travel with that he knew nothing about and wasn't personally acquainted with. Since she was not able to help and find the right person, the girl decided to return the money to him, because I couldn't take them after I couldn't help it. After that, he immediately realized that apparently she didn't fully understand him. So he asked what about her, and if she would mind traveling with him. Hannah started to make up excuses to refuse, but he saw it clearly and advised her to at least change her facial expression for him to believe that there was really no way she could go. In fact, she was just getting really anxious. After all, he was too cute, and no matter how much she didn't want to, Hannah kept saying no. The guy didn't insist and said he was sorry, and after that the girl wished him good luck in his search. One evening the girl was doing her work as usual, but this time a bit delayed due to a lot of work. She needed to clean the stables in order to keep the horses clean and organized. As suddenly all the horses started to be afraid of something and looked frightened. They were definitely disturbed by something, and perhaps they had spotted some danger. As it turned out, they weren't wrong, for they really felt something wrong. After that, they started running off somewhere fast, and Hannah didn't realize what was happening. She started to call them back, but it was pointless. The fact that absolutely all the horses have escaped from the stable may soon become a big problem for the girl. After all, she was responsible for them, and there would have to be some explanation for what had happened. They all scattered in different directions, and it was impossible to catch up with them. The girl knew for sure that she was really going to be in big trouble now. Suddenly, the fact that the horses ran away wasn't the worst part. At that moment, a tiger approached her, and at that moment, Hannah couldn't even move from her seat, and didn't realize if it was possible to escape it and survive. But luckily, the tiger was not aggressive and didn't get too close to her, and at one point he just turned around and walked away. After that, the girl was able to calm down a bit and began to analyze the situation adequately. When she had time to think, she suggested that perhaps it was Lionel. If so, then she had nothing to fear. So she decided to address him by name, in hopes that he would return. But because it was night outside, such an atmosphere made the girl a bit wary, and even so, she acted calm enough. As Hannah waited for him to return, she thought that perhaps it was at night that he was much more comfortable being in the guise of a tiger. But something still confused her. After the girl noticed someone else's belongings, she wondered, aren't those the clothes Lionel was wearing? Na afterward remembered his words, how he said that Tiger's image was something secret. And then, Why did he need to turn into him on this particular night? Did something happen? And just to make sure of that, she started asking loudly if he was okay and hoped he could hear her. And after that she decided to take some object that was lying near her on the earth. And at that moment she was saying that she was about to approach it, to which he growled and ordered me not to touch the thing under any circumstances. He was really aggressive at that point, but Hannah had only touched the object a little, at which point she asked why she wasn't allowed to do so. Suddenly something really magical and unusual began to happen. This tiger started to turn into something. You could see that he didn't want to. Apparently at that moment he wanted to warn the girl that if she touched the object, something would happen, namely his reincarnation, which he didn't have time to prevent. When the girl realized what had happened, she just couldn't believe her eyes. The only thing she wanted to know was if she had made some kind of mistake, but she didn't seem too upset to see this guy again. After all, he was so handsome that even in this situation she was glad to see him. And when it was time for him to say something, Hannah wondered if she had done something wrong. Of course it was obvious, but the guy didn't blame her for anything. The moment the girl noticed some glowing chain, she wanted to touch it, but it turned out to be impossible, and Lionel promised to explain it a little later, since he needed to get dressed first, so he asked for his things to be served to him. The thing is, what you have to touch is a magical relic that was created by an ancient royal family. They created it so that the divine beasts wouldn't run away from them. The girl at this point had a question as to why then this chain was now with her. It turns out that this is because Hannah is the next person to touch the relic, after Lionel. So the relic mistook the girl for Lionel's mistress. The guy asked if she remembered that he was looking for someone to travel with. He was originally going to reach a place where he could seal the relic. Therefore, he needed to find someone who could dispel the spell and end this matter. Hannah told him that such responsible matters could only be entrusted to trusted people. But the guy replied that there was no problem with that, and there could be a business relationship between them. And since she has no choice now, she'll have to go on a trip with him after all. But first, they decided to get to know each other. After they introduced themselves, it was clear that there was no turning back, and they were now obligated to reach their goal, and of course to trust each other. Lionel at this point decided to formally ask her to accompany him on his journey, and be a faithful assistant to him, but the girl didn't even know how to react to it. After all, she wasn't ready for it. In order to calm her down a bit, the guy decided to tell her that in case they could handle everything, there would be a monetary reward waiting for her as a result. He also tried to hint that he was starting to like her and read her as cute. When Hannah heard this, she was immediately embarrassed and pleased at the same time, because it was mutual. But it turns out that wasn't all. Lionel said that from now on he was obliged to fulfill her wishes. The only thing he could do for her was to bring back the horses that had run away because of him, and now she didn't know where to find them. Hannah wondered for a long time if she should ask him to do that, because she really doubted whether he was really capable of doing anything. Apparently he had expected something a little different, something more pleasant. But still, he had no choice but to do what she asked. It took him a few minutes to do so, and after that he was ready to tell her where her horses were. Lionel said they could be found that way, and besides, they hadn't run too far. Hannah didn't expect him to actually help her, so she was very grateful, and asked him to go with her to catch them. When they went to look for the horses, at that moment the chain disappeared somewhere, and Hannah didn't understand why it happened, and immediately asked Lionel what the reason for her disappearance was. He replied to her that she was disappearing for the convenience of the master, so no need to worry as everything was fine. And as they walked, the guy was thinking about something, and it looked like it was really important. He assumed that if the horses saw him, they might not like it, and because of that, there was a chance they might start running away from them, and catching up would be difficult. Hannah then asked him if he meant to say that the horses had gone wild because of him, and he replied that he didn't even doubt it, because animals are very sensitive to odors, and hinted that she might not even doubt his words, since he knew something about it after all. At this point, the guy decided to remind again that the girl could now order him to do whatever she wanted, and he would obey it without fail, except that for her, she wondered how much power she wielded, and what orders he would never follow. Lionel suggested checking it out, as it would be much more interesting that way, to which the girl asked not to talk to her with such innuendos anymore, because she was getting uncomfortable, to which the guy replied that he would be careful from now on, and it wouldn't happen again. She was very pleased that he quickly admitted his guilt and didn't argue with her, in order for her to feel comfortable being around him. He then informed her that their journey would start from tomorrow, and asked her to be ready for it. After a while they did find a horse, and the girl was madly glad of it. And the guy at that moment was pleased with himself, for he had succeeded in making her happy. It really makes him feel good when a girl is excited about something, and he has something to do with it. It also became clear to him that she could be happy about anything, even the fact that she had found some horse. The next morning they were ready to set out on their journey, and Lionel asked if she would like to cry goodbye. And as cliché as it sounds, Hannah had gotten used to his jokes by now, and replied that it wasn't necessary since she'd be back soon anyway. When it was time to leave, the girl asked why Lionel was in no hurry at all, for they still had a long walk to the capital. One gets the impression that in her presence the guy is completely oblivious to any problems, and the fact that they are late, he wasn't interested in that. Still, sometimes he was afraid Hannah would change her mind, so he kept reminding her that there was a reward waiting for her very soon. And when they were finally getting going, the girl asked what their plans were. Lionel said he used to have a clear plan, but now they will walk as many steps per day as is comfortable for her, because he doesn't want to tire her out, and he hoped the girl would appreciate his concern and begin to trust him more. Afterwards, Hannah noticed that they had taken too few things with them, and asked if it would be enough. He replied that it wasn't a problem, and he could find food for them anyway. When the girl realized that he had already taken care of everything long ago, and thought of everything, she realized that she had nothing to worry about, and he would take care of everything anyway. So she trusted him more and more. It was time to discuss how they would vacation in the countryside, because they needed somewhere to spend the night. And it turns out that Lionel has one very good option. Only he said it needed her consent. With this he intrigued her greatly, and the girl wanted to know soon what he meant, to which he asked if there was anything warmer than his fur. Of course, Hannah had expected to hear something different, so she was a little disappointed by his suggestion. After that he said he could turn into a tiger and sleep with her in his arms. But if she was against it, there was an option to buy some tent in the nearest village. After a while they found a place to stop and finally rest after the long journey. Lionel inquired if the girl was not tired after such a journey, to which she replied that so far she was all right, for it was only the first day. By then the food was ready and they had meat for dinner. Since the guy was quite responsible, he made sure they had something to eat, and when everything was ready, he wished them a pleasant appetite. Suddenly he told her he thought she would sit across from him, but she was much more comfortable sitting next to him and basking in the warmth of the fire. And after she'd had a little dinner, she had something she wanted to ask him. After all, she really wanted to see him turn into a tiger. And of course it wasn't surprising at all, for it was something he was asked to do very often. But he could only do it for her. So said she could order it to him with a relic. Hannah immediately refused and said she didn't want to order him around. She didn't like feeling in charge of him, because she doesn't own it and has no right to dispose of anyone for her own purposes. So she refused to order him anything because it was disrespectful to him. And after that, she went on with her dinner and advised him to join soon as well. As she was eating, she got a little dirty with her food. Lionel noticed this and decided to wipe the stain on her face, thus showing that he liked to take care of her. The girl thanked him for it was a pleasure to her. Afterward, as they sat and relaxed, the guy told her that he was actually very glad that the girl had agreed to this trip and trusted him. When morning came, it was time to set off, but it was not an easy journey. There were several obstacles to overcome, and it turned out to be very difficult, but still they were ready to cope with any difficulties. And when they saw some cabin that appeared to be abandoned, they thought it would be a good idea to stop there and rest. After all, it was much better than lying on the ground. After 24 hours, the girl only now said that she was very tired. The guy replied that she was really good and was doing a good job. So he offered her some rest, and he decided to go get some food. And the girl noticed that he did not take any devices with him, so she asked if he would do it in the guise of a tiger. To this he asked her if she was interested in seeing it, at which point he began to change his clothes. He embarrassed her a lot, and Hannah asked him what he was doing it for. It turns out that there's no way he could be a tiger with his clothes on. The girl only then realized that it actually made sense, because if he was wearing a t-shirt at that moment, it would just rip, and every time he would have to buy new things. Several hours had passed since then. Hannah had already gotten some rest, and Lionel said he was already back, to which she asked him if he was now in tiger form or not, because she was still hoping to see it. But he's already reincarnated, in order to keep the suspense going as long as possible. The guy didn't come empty-handed, and he managed to get some food. As he stood in front of the girl, She couldn't believe that she had the opportunity to admire such a beautiful guy. He was perfect for her, and of course he'd noticed that, and maybe even walked in front of her like that on purpose. But this time he did not remain silent, and asked why this time she did not look away, to which the girl replied that beautiful things should be viewed up close. He realized at that moment that she definitely liked him, and he also noticed that he really liked her ambiguous phrases, and replied that it was better not to tease him and to be more careful with such compliments, because then he'd have to be careful, and she might not be able to stop him. To which Hannah replied that she could stop him with a relic anyway. But the guy said that's really one way to do it, but no one knows who will win the battle between him and the relic, so it's best not to risk arguing with him. The girl realized that indeed, he knew what he was talking about, and sometimes it was better to listen to him if she wasn't sure about something. But after his words, she began to doubt that the relic might not work against him in some situation. And that's why she's got anxiety about it, because she's not completely sure she has enough power. But she would only be able to be sure of that in a concrete situation. And besides, for now, he had no reason to doubt Lionel. As he spoke, he thought about the fact that since it was about a potential threat to her, she wasn't the least bit afraid of him. And that kind of relationship, it's perfect for his purpose. It's time to prepare dinner, because they have to get up early again tomorrow, so they need to prepare everything from the evening. And that's when he needed to transform into a tiger for something. The girl had to turn away and wait for it to happen. When he turned to her, she heard his voice change drastically, and she could definitely feel a large tiger behind her. So she asked if she could look at him, and he said she could. Just warned her not to be afraid of him. After all, she probably wasn't ready to see such a thing in front of her, and that's something to be prepared for. When Hannah looked at him, she couldn't believe that such a thing was possible. She had a sense of wonder, fear, and elation at the same time, because it's not every day that she witnesses such a transformation. And when Lionel asked if she was scared now, she couldn't even answer anything normally. But it turns out that his sense of consternation was less than admiration. She wouldn't stop telling him how cute he looked as a tiger, and he didn't seem to like it, because he was expecting to hear something completely different, like how scared she was at the sight of such a huge tiger, and instead she wanted around him and admired him as if he were a little kitten. Out of frustration, he asked her to stop squealing with joy, for she was too excited about the cute new animal. Every minute the girl asked to touch his ears or his paws, and it seemed impossible for her to leave his side for a few minutes. And eventually he got a little tired of it, because she never left his side, and instead of being afraid, she was constantly admiring him and telling him how cute he was. But she was understandable too, because she had never seen anything like this before. She wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. When the girl touched him, she told him that he was very warm, and with his fur you could keep warm at night. But the only thing Lionel wanted to ask her was whether she was not afraid of him at all, and had no excitement at the sight of such an animal. But it was as if she didn't notice these questions because she was thrilled with what she saw. And then Lionel realized for sure that she saw him as an ordinary tiger, not a divine being. But sometimes it seemed as if she saw him as an ordinary cat, which was even more frustrating. But Hannah had no fear of him simply because she knew him well, and realized that he carried no danger to her. The girl still didn't understand why he was so offended. After all, she hadn't said anything offensive to him. Although for sure, if the girl saw such an animal somewhere in the forest, she would definitely be frightened. But now, she realizes that it is her friend, who will never harm her. As suddenly, Lionel took advantage of the situation, and decided that this was the moment, and it would be a good idea to surprise her. Plus, she definitely won't suspect it, and she'll probably be very surprised, and she might even like it. It happens in just a few seconds, and it becomes interesting to see her reaction. Lionel at this point wanted to reincarnate as a human and thus surprise the girl, and it looks like he succeeded. Either way, he didn't mind lying and resting next to her in a human body, and wanted it to be mutual. That's how they fell asleep. This night was much more comfortable as they had the whole house to themselves. And when Hannah woke up, she was surprised at how soft the blanket was, for it was incredibly warm to sleep at night. But then she realized it wasn't a blanket. It was a tiger. She had certainly never slept like that before, and she never imagined that one day she would sleep under such protection, in the form of a real huge tiger. After they both woke up, Lionel asked if she had slept well, to which the girl replied that it had been insanely warm and comfortable, thanks to him. At this point he had somehow gotten a lot smaller so as not to startle the girl from the morning. After all, when she first woke up, She could very easily have been frightened by the huge tiger that was very close by. Since they didn't have time for long conversations, they needed to hurry up and finally continue on their way. But first I had to clean myself up, wash my face, prepare breakfast and eat well, so that I would have strength for the hard road ahead. So the girl decided to cook something, and she had to think of a dish that would please both her and Lionel. But when she was cooking, she forgot to ask him what he would like for breakfast. Does he like to eat vegetables for breakfast? To which he replied that he wouldn't mind absolutely any dish she made for him, and he had no foods he didn't like. So he said Hannah could take it easy, and whatever she cooks he's sure to like. Either way, he's very pleased that she made an effort and prepared something for him, and he would love to enjoy this delicious breakfast with her. Hannah didn't expect him to like everything so much and appreciate her efforts. But that's not the end of their conversation, and the guy has no idea what Hannah is about to ask him. The girl asked if she could ask him one uncomfortable question that he might not answer if he didn't like something. It turns out that the girl wanted to ask about whether a child could be born from a man like him who reincarnates as a tiger, to which he replied that it was quite likely, and it was probably possible after all. And after that, he still decided to find out why she was interested in it. The girl replied that she had asked the question solely for scientific purposes. In the past, there were many divine beasts that intermarried with humans. Because of the difference in life expectancy, the end was sad, but despite that, they were still happy. But the boy doubted it. Even though the girl said it was true, he still didn't believe her. After that, he decided to ask an uncomfortable question too, and it turned out to be even more interesting than hers. The guy asked if she had a young man, and it was probably definitely not for scientific purposes, to which she replied that she didn't have a young man, and it turns out that Lionel thought she did, and wasn't even surprised by her answer. Hannah said she was surprised to hear him ask such a question, because she thought he wasn't interested in such trivial things. But that wasn't all Lionel wanted to ask her. Afterward, he said that just as unexpected was her question about the possibility of him and her having children. She replied that she didn't mean that at all, and he had misunderstood her. He was sure that was what she meant, though, and she was just afraid to ask him that, so she made up that it was for scientific purposes. She felt too awkward after that and didn't know what to say to him. It was time to finally get out and continue on my way. It was so quiet outside that not a single bird or other sound could be heard. But there was one unpleasant moment. It was so hot outside that it was impossible to move comfortably, and we had to stop often to rest. But they still needed to accomplish the day's planned chores, so they had to move on. The guy saw that it was getting harder for the girl to walk and asked about it. She replied that it was getting unpleasant, and even my feet weren't so much tired as chafed, and it even gave me blisters. To which the guy suggested that if possible, they could walk to the next shelter, and if not, they could stop and rest. But Hannah said it was wrong, because they still had so much to go, and she couldn't afford to let herself slack off. Lionel was surprised and didn't understand why the girl refused to rest. He said that she would not be able to walk properly anyway, and why make the hike harder for herself? But the girl surprisingly decided not to complain anymore, and silently continued walking. And the guy thought that she would complain all the time and pay attention to it. But she held on, and never complained about any difficulties again. Still, he wondered if he should ignore the fact that the girl was having a really hard time. So he said if at any point she got really tired and it was impossible to walk, to let him know right away. When they reached the place where they could stay for the night, Hannah was very glad. At last they could rest. And the first thing Lionel did was to take off her shoes to see what was wrong with her foot, and why she was in so much pain to walk. It turns out that because of the very uncomfortable shoes, her feet got very badly chafed, and it was impossible to walk in them. Probably because these shoes are not designed for such long hikes. So the guy said it was necessary to get her more comfortable shoes from a nearby store as soon as possible. Can you imagine how uncomfortable it was to walk in them? But for now, he had a method by which to take away the pain. And for that he asked her not to move or move her legs, as he was about to apply a medicinal plant they had found along the way. They wondered if any plant could quickly take away such pain. And also, at this point, he really enjoyed wooing the girl and doing something useful for her. And he hoped that she would appreciate it, that she would have some trust in him. I mean, that's really important. When it came time to put the plant on her leg, Hannah said she had imagined it somehow more magical, and it turned out to be just a leaf to put where it hurt. To which Lionel replied that it was the only way he could help her now. They had no other option. At that moment, the girl started laughing and said that a plant that had just been chewed by a tiger was being applied to her, to which he replied that there was no need to compare it to an ordinary animal, because it was unpleasant for him. After all, he is a special tiger for whom it is very humiliating to hear such a thing. As the girl suddenly realized that she herself could chew the plant and apply it to her leg, and asked if it was so, and then it turns out that even this time, when it was necessary, he took care of her. And this is yet another moment where he proves that he enjoys taking care of her. Thus he thanks her, among other things, for this journey together and her consent to it. After that, there will be the next step, which will help to reduce the pain some more. Hannah didn't even realize it would be so important for him to help, and he would do whatever it took to do it. Instead of resting and preparing for the next day, he decided to give her a massage that would make the pain in her leg go away much faster. The girl, of course, appreciated it and was grateful to him. Besides, the massage was really very good, because he is a real professional in it. She asked him if he had any ideas about opening a massage parlor. After all, it would surely be one of the best. Lionel replied that, unfortunately, he had absolutely no time for that. At that moment it was very hard for her to stop admiring him. After all, he was very close and looked too cute. So sometimes there were thoughts that she might accidentally fall in love with him because of this. And it could happen at any moment. He has been intentionally seducing her from the beginning. This could indicate that he also likes her and is thinking about it too. But if you ignore it, it will be easier to keep your distance and not make mistakes. After all, the fact that she agreed to the journey was just so he could take her to the capital. If you fall in love with him, you can make a lot of mistakes, and chances are he'll be against it, or doesn't need it. So she offered to discuss something personal, but because he didn't know exactly what topic she wanted to talk about, it seemed to him that it would be best not to. And the girl herself isn't sure she'll be able to have a normal conversation with him about anything in particular, and not worry. So he said he would have to back out and postpone this conversation for a while. Then suggested that he was willing to listen carefully if she had something interesting to tell him, and something intimate to share. Hannah then said then it would be best to discuss it a little later when everyone was ready for it. In order not to waste time, the girl suggested that she should lie down to rest as soon as possible. Tomorrow it would take a lot of strength and energy to walk a sufficient distance. Lionel suspected that she wanted to talk about something concerning their future relations and sympathies for each other. So he decided that everything should happen by itself, and that it did not require any discussion. Especially for now, Hannah is keeping her distance, and it doesn't look like she'd want anything more. At least she doesn't show it, although she wouldn't really mind, because she definitely likes him. Along the way, the guy decided to share some interesting information. All the relics he had are kept by the elves who live in Rhodium, to which Hannah asked if only elves could seal relics. It turns out that someone other than them would definitely be able to do it. But only elves have pure magic, so as much as he'd like to, he had to leave the relic with the head elf Ezekiel Escott. Lionel had no other option to do with the relic, as it had too much power inside. After that, Hannah asked if elves and divine beasts had been on good terms before. And of course, the boy knew what to answer. After all, there used to be a lot of controversy because of their borders being crossed. But there is no such thing now. It had been a long time since he'd had to remember his past, so it was rather unusual to realize just how much time had passed since then. After his story, Hannah thanked him for it, and was glad she got to talk about some interesting topics and learn something new. But what the guy really wanted was to distract her from the pain in her leg during his story. So she didn't even suspect that he was telling her at that moment for a reason. Suddenly, he seems to realize where this awkwardness is coming from. It was because he mistakenly thought that the girl had absolutely no interest in him, and for some reason he was sure of it, even though it wasn't true. Usually all the girls had feelings for him, and he was used to their attention. So he didn't understand why Hannah was acting so differently. It turns out, getting her attention is only possible in the guise of a tiger. But in fact, he just does not know how often the girl admires and considers him cute, except that he hides it very carefully. And just because of that, she becomes more and more interesting to him. Because she's special, and doesn't let him get close to her as easily as others did. So he decided to fix that somehow and try to get her to like him after all. Lionel asked if there was a definite reason why she didn't have a beloved man, to which Hannah replied that there was no such reason. She just hadn't found love yet, but still would like to date a handsome and nice guy. So the guy decided not to waste the opportunity, and said that if he wanted to, he could start any time. If she wants it, of course, and would be okay with it. Since this sentence was not very specific, he only intrigued the girl with these words. So she thought that maybe she had misunderstood him, and it was better not to hurry with the answer. And she also thought it would do him good to stop talking in hints and start offering something concrete. Afterwards, he said that, for example, he found it very difficult to find a partner, even if he wanted it badly, to which the girl asked if it was because of his long life expectancy. He replied that it was one of the reasons, because few people could live as long as he did. Also, not every girl would want a guy who is sometimes a tiger. At this point, surprisingly, Hannah decided to compliment him, and told him that for sure, it's not easy to be handsome. To which he replied, did she really think he was like that and wasn't afraid to say so? He thought she hardly ever looked at him and didn't care. But afterward, in order to keep him from getting too excited, she told him that he wasn't her type. And besides, there were plenty of people in the world more attractive than him. She probably said it on purpose to hide the fact that she liked him. This will make him even more certain that she's not interested in him. Again, though, it's unclear why she does this. Since she really likes him, Hannah is just afraid to tell him, because she thinks it's not mutual and it might upset her. Each day they have more topics to talk about and it becomes much easier to get used to each other. Plus, the girl told him he was a great conversationalist and he asked what she meant. Hannah said he has a knack for keeping the conversation going quickly and is very comfortable with him, as if they've known each other for a very long time. Every time they don't even notice the time passing during the conversation. It's an indicator that they're genuinely interested in each other. And importantly, they feel very comfortable, because they are quite used to being around each other. So they are very happy that they were able to finally get along, and they don't have any conflicts. But it's still better to watch your words sometimes, because you can accidentally offend someone. It turns out that a guy may not always keep a conversation going because it can take too much energy, and if he doesn't listen to someone, people can usually take offense. After all, they mistakenly think that he's not interested with them, even though he's not. He is always ready to listen to any person, yet he is never verbose. But despite that, the guy still tries to always be supportive and give some advice, and he does it briefly so it doesn't take a lot of energy. When they discussed it, he stopped talking for some reason, and just walked behind the girl. She noticed something was wrong and decided to ask him what was wrong. After all, she thought she might have offended him somehow, or he might have had something unpleasant to hear from her. But he replied that everything was fine, and nothing like that had happened. Which is why Lionel lives in a human world, the last divine beast on Earth. Lionel Millard was the one who you couldn't understand because he was different. Lionel's divine beast, non-human, can't commit his life to people. So I've lived alone for too long, and it's been very difficult. It was hard for the girl to imagine how lonely he was, and how he felt alone, without any support, and someone by his side. But still, it didn't make sense for her to feel guilty about it. So anything she can do for him right now, to make his journey a little more interesting and exciting, and if necessary, support him in some way because he really needs it and it's important to him. Well, and of course to give compliments. Besides, she likes it very much herself. So the girl told him that he has very strong hands, and looks strong enough. Of course he was pleased to hear that, because it's very rare for someone to say that to him. Hannah hoped that this humble gesture would be some comfort in his loneliness, and he would realize that she could always support him and be there for him. After half a day, they finally reached a village where they could find a proper home. They're already looking forward to enjoying the comforts of home and not spending the night in some obscure place. Hannah was already imagining sleeping in a soft and spacious bed tonight, and maybe there'll be a tub of warm water where she can relax and unwind after a long drive. And the best part was that now they wouldn't have to get food and cook it, because other people would cook it for them. Hannah said she had long dreamed of sleeping in a bed without the insects that used to crawl in when they slept outside. Lionel saw her joyful expression for the first time in a long time. When it came time to find out if there were any rooms available, one woman said that unfortunately, there was only one room left available. And it turns out that they have to sleep in the same room, and therefore the same bed. Except this woman didn't know they weren't in a relationship, and that would be a problem for them. And since Hannah's feet were really sore, the guy offered to go along with it. But the girl didn't seem to like it very much. She knew very well that it was a marketing move. When people asked to be put in a separate room, they were told that there was no such possibility, so that when one person came, they could offer him a two-room room and get more money. So the girl didn't want to fall for that trick, so she thought of something to get 2 rooms. So I told them that unfortunately they'd have to find another hotel, because they didn't like that option at all. And it worked. The woman asked me to wait, and then she supposedly remembered that they had a spare room, and it became clear that she was just lying when she said there were no other options. Thus showed a master class in how to communicate with such people, because they do not always tell the truth in order to get more money. Afterward, the guy asked if she was so reluctant to be in the same room, because it would be a lot safer, and if anything, he could protect her. But afterwards he said that if that's what she wanted, he'd accept whatever she wanted, as long as she was comfortable. To explain, Hannah said that she would never allow herself to be lied to by anyone, and she wanted to get the truth out of that woman on principle. And it had nothing to do with the fact that she didn't want to be in the same room with him for whatever reason, and told him not to think she might be uncomfortable around him anymore. When they had found their rooms, Lionel bid her rest, and said that in the meantime, he would go and look for some comfortable shoes for her, for which the girl thanked him, of course. But she also asked if it was possible to buy new clothes, because she wanted to wear something cleaner. Afterward, when the girl was sorting out her things, this woman knocked at her room and asked her to come in. Turns out she wanted to apologize for that situation, and said that she had actually forgotten that there was one room left available. Hannah said everything is fine, and she's very happy that this problem has been resolved after all. Afterward, the woman asked where and what they would dine, to which the girl replied that they would decide that when Lionel returned. Before leaving, the woman asked who the cute guy she came with was to her, and said it was very obvious from the outside that they really liked each other, and they would be a good couple. But this conversation was a little uncomfortable for the girl, and she didn't want to talk about it, at least not with this strange woman. Meanwhile, Lionel went to the store and started to pick out the most comfortable shoes, and I think he found something. It didn't take him long to pick out the most suitable shoes, and he bought them at once, as suddenly he noticed that there was a very pretty dress nearby, but still he passed it by. After that, Lionel remembered that he needed to buy some food for dinner, plus there was a suitable store nearby with a large selection of vegetables and other groceries. As expected, his going out to the humans couldn't have gone so perfectly without some strange situations. Some guy started yelling his name loudly, and asked him who the girl he came with was, and then afterward assumed that they were dating and she was his girlfriend. But Lionel is used to such situations, and he is not surprised by such insolent behavior of other people. That guy was being too ugly, as he had no right to ask about it because it was completely none of his business. Lionel wondered if he should even answer such tactless questions. He's really sick of being disrespected, because he doesn't have to tell anyone anything. He used to take it as interest in his personality, but then it turned out that it was just disrespect and insolence in his direction. The reason it was comfortable to talk to Hannah was that she was somewhat indifferent to him, and didn't act like everyone else did. Since he didn't feel like answering such questions from others, he decided to ignore them and go to the girl. Just said it was time for him to go. He would have been embarrassed before, but now he doesn't care what anyone thinks. Then he finally came back, and as he approached the girl's room, he warned her that he was coming in, and said he bought everything she asked for, and tried to pick the best to make her comfortable, for which she thanked him, for it was a pleasure to feel his care once more. And she was especially pleased that he had gone to the store after a long journey, and instead of resting, was looking for new clothes and shoes for her. He wanted to show her his purchases and see how she reacted, and make sure it fits her and he's got the right size. But because he was uncomfortable being in her room and seeing her in her sleepwear, he was a little embarrassed. But at the same time, he wanted to be with her as long as possible. First, he gave her new things, and offered to see what he'd bought her. But at that moment, he continued to stand there with his eyes closed. When Hannah pulled her new clothes out of the bag, she loved everything, because there was absolutely everything she needed. And after that, I wanted to say that he really knows what girls like, but she changed her mind about telling him because it might offend him, or he might misunderstand her. After the girl thanked him for the new clothes, the guy suggested going out to dinner, as he had been hungry for a long time. To which the girl replied that she had just put medicine on her feet, and it would probably be uncomfortable to go somewhere else. And it turned out to be no problem at all for him. The guy offered to carry her to make it easier for her. Afterwards, she happened to notice a lot of people gathered near their window and asked if they were his fans, to which Lionel said that it would not be easy to get past them, so they could ask for food to be brought for them directly to their room. And afterwards he suggested we go out to dinner, if she didn't mind him carrying her in his arms. At this point, They had the choice of accepting the hotel food and staying in the room, or being a little patient and going to cook their own food. But he would carry the girl in his arms, and I think she's already decided which one she likes best. And after that, asked him what he was waiting for, because she was ready, and he could pick her up. It was an answer he hadn't expected, so he was sure Hannah would ask for dinner to be brought directly to their room. Was perfectly fine with it, because he didn't really want to eat what strangers cooked him for dinner. They were already prepared for the fact that when people saw them, there would be a lot of noise and various gossips. And when they were ready to go out, Hannah told me that the innkeeper had recently visited her and was interested in their relationship. After that, he decided to apologize for her having to endure such questions from others because of him. But the girl told him there was no problem, and the only person who needed to apologize was that woman, because she had started asking something she had no right to, because it was none of her business. Afterwards, the guy asked her what she had said to those impertinent questions. Hannah said she had just pretended not to understand what was being said so as not to start a conflict, because I didn't have to answer her and tell a stranger about my personal life. Lionel hadn't expected the girl to be so calm about that woman's question, and was very glad that everything was all right. For more than anything else, he did not want their journey to bring discomfort or any inconvenience to her. But still, despite all the difficulties, he is very glad that he offered this particular girl to go on a trip with him. And then they had dinner and went to rest. A new day came, and this time it was much more pleasant to set off. After a good dinner and quality sleep, it was much easier to set off. And as soon as they got out, Hannah noticed how much more comfortable she was getting around. Shoes were so comfortable that she forgot about any pain, and didn't even remember it was some kind of trouble. But there was something that made her uncomfortable, because Lionel's been acting very strangely since this morning, and not as usual. And she got excited about it because she thought it was about her. All day long, for some reason, he's been watching her closely and making this face. And just to make a point, she asked if there was something wrong with her face, and that's why he was doing that. To which he replied that it was fine. Now she certainly doesn't understand why he's looking at her like that then. And he won't say what happened to him. It went on for a long time. Even while they ate, she felt guilty about something, and she didn't understand what she had done wrong, or if she was the reason at all. It made it hard to enjoy the food. Usually she likes to enjoy any meal, but this time, it was very hard to do so. He hadn't said a word to her since, and she was really beginning to feel guilty about something. Besides, Lionel never took his eyes off her for a second, and kept looking into her eyes as if offended or wanting to say something. Because his eyes were like those of some predator, the girl was uncomfortable, for he was silent all the time. And to remedy the strange atmosphere a little, she said that the soup was very good, but it did not help. And he continued to look at her with the eyes of an angry tiger, and there came a point where she was actually scared to be around him. So she made up her mind after all, and asked him if there was a problem, or if she had done something wrong. To which he replied as succinctly as possible, no. After which the girl asked again what could have upset him then, and even to this he gave no answer. Because of this, the situation became more and more uncomfortable and tense for her every minute. After they had eaten, he said that if she had finished eating, she could go to bed. And she listened to him and didn't say anything else. She was getting very frustrated because Lionel had been ignoring her all day. In order to have some kind of conversation with him, she decided to ask him something. What was the maximum height and size of the tiger he could transform into? But it seemed even on that, he didn't quite want to answer her. Hannah thought that if he got any bigger, he could easily accidentally run her over. After a while, the girl had gotten used to talking to herself, so she just decided to enjoy her vacation and not ask him any more questions. When suddenly, he addressed her by name, and he wanted to say something. Turns out he was going to ask her to lie closer to him. The girl didn't even expect to hear a word from him today, and accepted the fact that he wouldn't be talking to her for a very long time, and the reason was still unknown to her. No matter how hard she tried to learn something from him, these attempts were unsuccessful. But it looked like he'd decided to mend his ways after all, and had at least started paying attention to her somehow. At this point, she certainly wanted to know the reason for what was going on with him, but thought it best not to ask him anything, and he would soon tell her everything himself. So it's best to be patient for a while, and it will all make sense soon enough. After he had, out of habit, accidentally soaped her, she immediately ran to find water or some lake nearby. He apologized afterwards and said it was an accident, so he asked me not to be offended and to forgive him, but she was still very uncomfortable, and she said she'd be back soon. But she had no idea that it was getting very hard for him to hide his feelings. And he'd been feeling something for her for a long time now, and it's getting harder every day to hold back, and it's becoming almost impossible. After a few minutes the girl returned, and said that she had had difficulty in finding some lake to wash off all the mud. But at that moment, Lionel asked her to go somewhere to pack, but didn't say where exactly yet. The only thing he told her was that something urgent came up, so there was an urgent need to rush somewhere, thereby creating an incredible intrigue. The girl climbed on the tiger for the first time and found out how fast it was. She could barely hold on to it to keep from falling off. On the way, she could not understand what other business it was that he could not tell her about, and why it was such a secret. Except it's going to get even more confusing from here on out. Lionel didn't want to upset the girl too much and tell her something, so he didn't say anything, and all day long he was silently thinking about something, and it was for a reason. At that moment, he asked her to leave his things, and to find a room in the village until he returned, and for that he would leave her some money, which should be enough for a while. But since he didn't tell her anything, she started to worry, because she didn't understand what was going on and what he was doing it for, and even started to think that he had some problem that he didn't want her involved in. So he didn't say anything, and he was going to run off and solve some problems. She wanted very much to go with him, and not to be alone, for she would be very much worried about him, and afraid if anything happened to him. But for some reason, he couldn't tell her anything. Hannah didn't even know what it was that would make her have to wait for him for, I know how long. He realized that she wouldn't let him go, so he decided to help her get to the right place, because there's no way she would have left him on her own, and he knew it. After that, he did not say a word to her, though the girl asked him to explain something to her, so that she could be at ease for him. And we don't know if he's keeping quiet because he doesn't want to upset her, or if he's just got some personal business to take care of. Hannah felt very lonely at that moment, and she didn't know how long she would have to wait for him in the village, and she was scared because she was all alone, and there was no one to protect her in case of trouble, because she's used to being around him all the time and she doesn't have to worry about her safety. Because of this situation, the girl was a little angry, because she was very worried about him, and she was afraid that he might not come back. If something happens, she doesn't even know where he is or where he's gone. Plus, he didn't explain how long it would take, or how many days it would take to see him. But she had absolutely no choice, and just had to spend some time in a hotel, in an unfamiliar town far from home. So she just decided to go to bed and not think about anything bad. But in the morning, she got a big surprise, and she wasn't exactly prepared for it. When Hannah first opened her eyes, she couldn't even imagine who she'd see in front of her. It was him. Lionel. She hadn't even expected him to come back so quickly. It hadn't even been a few days since she'd seen him again, and she was so happy about it. To which he replied that she had a perfectly developed sense of smell, and not even elves could sense his presence. The first thing she asked him was if he had hurt himself. Lionel replied that he hadn't fought anyone, and he was fine. Hannah was already anxious to find out what he was hiding from her, and where he had been all night while she slept. But still, he decided to tell her something. And he started by saying that he was both divine and animal, only the girl didn't quite know what he meant by that, or what he wanted to say. But then he went on to say that because of that, he has a slightly different body structure than normal people, so he wants a woman's attention and intimacy much more often and more intensely, and said he hopes she understands what he's telling her. And that's when she began to realize, for he had to go somewhere else. How to do that with her, he couldn't. And so it's sometimes very hard for him to be around such a beautiful girl all the time. And after Hannah made sure he wasn't in trouble, she felt a lot better. And I also decided to ask him what he usually does when he's having a hard time holding back. Lionel said he usually just goes to the mountains to unwind and get some fresh air, or has temporary relationships with girls who don't mind it. And also said that he has long thought about starting a relationship with one girl who will truly love him, and they can live together. Except there was one thing she didn't think about at all, because a guy only wants something like that after he's with her. It means he likes her for sure. It's obvious enough, but for now, she doesn't think about it, and doesn't believe that he's in love with her, and has had some feelings for quite a long time. But she hides it well. It was time to rest. They wished each other good dreams and a good night, and afterward went to their rooms. The next day the guy woke up early and went to order their breakfast food, which is 1 full meal and 5 pieces of meat. But he thought that wouldn't be enough, so he decided to order an extra lunch for 3 people and some fruit and vegetables. By this time, Hannah had already started looking for him, and the first thing she did was to go down to the first floor, where she found him at once. Lionel said he had already ordered a hearty breakfast for them, for which the girl thanked him, and waited impatiently for their food to be brought to them already. For some reason, the guy thought that the girl would be angry with him after yesterday, but it was not so, because she understood him perfectly well, and did not see anything wrong in that situation. How could he think? The whole time they were sitting and waiting for their breakfast, they saw that absolutely every single person who was there was already looking at them, which made them uncomfortable, because absolutely everyone was paying attention to them, so it was impossible to feel comfortable. But it wasn't surprising. This happens every time he's around people. Except it's still very hard for even him to get used to it and ignore them. They act so insolent and ill-mannered, which is why Lionel never liked to be in the presence of ordinary people. After this situation, he once again apologized for such inconvenience, because she has to endure it because of him. At that moment, they began to bring them breakfast, and the girl told him that there was nothing surprising in their behavior. Their insolence could be explained by the fact that they simply did not know what politeness was, and when the girl heard the men talking about some blonde girl they'd seen near him, she decided to ask something, if he preferred girls with blonde hair, but it was more of a rhetorical question to lighten things up a bit, to which he replied that it was all nonsense, and you shouldn't believe people like them. After that she asked again, about what Lionel would do if this town wasn't so close, and had to run very far to the mountains. Then the guy realized that his absence had offended her a bit, and she had some feelings after all, so he decided to answer such questions carefully enough not to start a conflict or offend her. So he decided to make it up to her, and said that it was very hard for him to find a girl as beautiful as her, and he'd really like to find someone like her in the future, but it didn't seem to help, and she bluntly said that she felt really bad about that situation, and when she realized that the whole time, he was with some other girl, and it wasn't her, to which he promised it wouldn't happen again, and said he understood what she meant. So he offered to find an alternative, and hoped that she would understand him correctly, and that he would not look too brazen in her eyes by suggesting such a thing, to which the girl did not give a specific answer, because she felt awkward and afraid to talk to him about such things. It's because it's too hard for Hannah to talk to someone she likes, as suddenly, Lionel promised that he wouldn't embarrass her anymore, or ask her anything if she didn't like it, or was uncomfortable with it, to which she replied that he had the right to say whatever he wanted, but that it should be taken into account that the girl might not agree with him on something. At that moment, he wanted to change the subject and talk about something else, because he could see how much she didn't like to discuss it, and he wasn't too keen on the subject either. But then, she hinted to him that in order to get what she wanted, he needed to be someone she could trust, and if he decides to harm or do anything bad without her consent, she'll destroy him. And Hannah said it with a very sweet expression on her face, which softened her words a bit. He of course understood her, but still decided to support her joke and said, "Is she capable of destroying the last divine being on this earth?" Hannah replied that it was just a joke, and the point was that she would never forgive him for something bad towards her, and only wanted to warn him about it. Afterward he reminded her that for the moment she need not worry about his honesty, for in any case she could order him with the relic at least to take her as his wife, and he would be obliged to fulfill it. As suddenly, he decided to visualize it, and in his mind it looked something like this: a beautiful white dress, blonde hair, blue eyes, and everything that matches this beautiful event. And it was a little funny as the girl became convinced that those rumors about the blonde were true, and decided to make a joke about it, because he'd declassified himself, except he didn't realize it right away, when suddenly, the same girl with blonde hair comes up to them. It was a real coincidence. It appears that the image of his bride-to-be was taken from a certain girl he may have known, when suddenly this stranger for some reason started getting angry and asking who the girl was standing with him, I mean Hannah, and apparently she wasn't happy about it. Afterward, she asked if he was in a relationship with Hannah, and also called her not very pretty and unworthy of him. At this point, Lionel ordered her to watch her words and not to insult Hannah. It became clear that they knew each other, and may even have been in a relationship that Lionel had not told Hannah anything about, and there must have been a reason for it. You can see that he's not exactly happy about it. There must have been some conflict between them, and it must have been something serious that he didn't want to tell Hannah. But still he couldn't hide it. And it turned out that it was completely by accident that she found out about everything. Or at least guessed it. It turns out she's here to demand that you marry her, and after that, he wondered if she'd remember to ask him if he wanted it or not, and why, all of a sudden, he should do it. This girl looked kind of crazy, and she kept yelling at Lionel in front of everyone, but suddenly she told him the reason why he should marry her. It turns out there was something between them after all. The people around them watched it like a TV show, and sometimes even joked that all that was missing was popcorn and a comfy couch. After the strange girl's words, Hannah wondered if it was even worth it to be there and listen to all of this. Because maybe they needed to be alone and talk it over quietly. And the most amazing part is that this girl was pregnant and claims it's his baby, and that's why he has to marry her. At that moment, Hannah finally decided that she had to leave, because she had no desire to listen to their personal problems and conversations. And as Hannah was leaving, this crazy girl tried to stop her, apparently to accuse her of something and make her feel guilty. But at that moment Lionel stopped her and asked her not to touch Hannah, for she was not guilty of anything, nor did she know anything about it. So I explained that she had absolutely nothing to do with it, and you shouldn't touch her. But she was even more outraged when he started defending her and demanded that she stay out of it. It looked like a love triangle. But Hannah didn't want any part of it, and she said they'd be better off without her. But when this crazy girl started threatening Hannah and acting out, she just pissed the guy off even more. So he said he warned her one last time, and if she ever said anything to Hannah again, she'd regret it. It must have been convincing enough to her. But she still did not give any sign that she was a little frightened by this. But after he yelled at her and let her know that he wasn't going to forgive her for that behavior, she started asking how he could behave like that to the mother of his child. He replied that he had no problem marrying her, but he wasn't sure she was pregnant by him, because if she agreed to spend time with him so easily, there must be a lot of other guys who could be involved in this, and he's definitely not the only one. She can blame or prove that it's his child. As offensive as that sounds, the girl herself realizes that there's some truth to those words, and she needs to make sure exactly who the child is from first. As Hannah listened to all of this, it was hard for her to imagine how sick he was of listening to this. After all, this girl is kind of weird. She herself is not sure who the real father of the baby is, and yet she has no evidence to prove anything and accuse Lionel of something he may not even have anything to do with. The only thing Hannah wanted was for the girl to leave as soon as possible, and they would never see her again. But since she couldn't get away, she ordered herself a salad and decided to grab a bite, because it looked like this conversation wasn't going to end anytime soon. Lionel was just as eager to get rid of this girl as soon as possible, but she was too persistent, and it looked like she wasn't going to just walk away. So he invited Hannah to wait for him on the top floor, and promised he'd get back to her soon. It was amazing how Lionel was still acting calm enough, and trying to talk normally to her, because she wouldn't stop threatening Hannah, and even tried to hit her. But the guy reacted in time to stop her, for she was acting too inadequately, and it was becoming intolerable, and it seemed as if Lionel would not be able to bear her insolence any longer. What he didn't want most of all was for Hannah to hear all this and be insulted by someone. So he tried to make sure that didn't happen. He still managed to grab that girl's arm, so she couldn't hit Hannah. And if that had happened, it's hard to imagine how Lionel would have reacted to it. When the guy once again defended Hannah, this girl asked how dare he defend that girl and treat the mother of his child so horribly. Apparently she doesn't realize yet that the guy isn't going to believe this crap, and he'll only believe it when he sees the evidence. And in the meantime, she has absolutely no chance of deceiving him, and of becoming his wife by means of it. For he is far from stupid, and he knows enough girls who have tried to marry him in this manner